If there were a poll, should David be electrocuted, put in front of a firing squad, in some way killed right now, forget about a trial based on what people have heard, what percentage of people do you suppose in the climate we're in would vote for that? Mark, I got to tell you something. I read the autopsy report for Celeste Rivas, and there is one word in that autopsy report that I think is going to become the center of this trial, and I think it's a big problem for prosecutors. It's the word may. That they say in this autopsy report that Celeste may have had 2 puncture wounds in the abdomen and the chest, and that were caused by a sharp object. So it wouldn't be dismembering the body, it was penetration. But they say it may have been caused. This is a reasonable doubt case. And, you know, the coroner, it's hard to understand this because the coroner is definitively calling this a homicide. But the only link to a homicide is if those penetrating wounds were, say, knife wounds or some sort of homicide, but they can't even conclude that because they use the word may.
So I have cross-examined my fair share of medical examiners, and they are always going to say that when they make in fact, just this year, an LA County medical examiner on the stand admitted under cross-examination that the determination between homicide and undetermined is context. And I will tell you that this cross-examination of whoever they have testify, because it may not be the medical examiner, it may be a deputy, is going to admit under cross-examination that it was context, that it was LAPD giving them information. And I'm going to also say again, I've made this prediction, and I'll bet you it's true, that we're going to learn that when they go through the 40 terabytes or whatever of information, that the defense is going to point out, and the prosecution may actually try to preempt it, that they had to go to outside so-called experts in order to get to this point.
Well, that wouldn't necessarily blow up the prosecution's case if they went to an outside person.
Well, if you've got a timeline, which I believe you will have, you and I have talked repeatedly, including this week, about the fact that it's been unprecedented that a medical examiner would be basically shut down by the investigating agency from releasing the information. In fact, that latest statement by the medical examiner is damning with faint praise when he says, "I'd like to thank our partner agencies for allowing us to," and basically saying it's, what was the term? Unfathomable or unconscionable that they were not able to give some kind of closure to the family. All of those things are basically the medical examiner saying, hey, you can't just shut us down or shut us up and expect that we're going to go quietly into the night, which is unprecedented. And to your point, or to answer your question, going to outside experts does not signal a death knell necessarily, but what it does signal is a defense theme that they could not get the medical examiner to sing from the same sheet of music that they wanted. And that, to me, is a problem in this case.
Yeah, no, I get that. I get that. You know, now I've got a timeline. So in November, which is September, well, at least a little more than 2 months after actually 2.5 months, we contacted a source connected to the medical examiner. And what we were told was that they could not determine the cause of death, and they may never be able to determine cause of death. In December, that's when they ruled it a homicide. So we now know the time frame. So we're told 2.5 months after her body's discovered that they haven't determined it and may never. And then the next month, they call it a homicide definitively, but the support for that is qualified with the word may. And I found that interesting, but I think that, you know, the defense is going to just grill the medical examiner and the police department and ask, what changed? Why did you have such trouble for 2.5 months? And then a month later, you call it a homicide, but you can't definitively say she was stabbed. So
well,
it's
where in the timeline was it when you reported specifically LAPD said, we're not even sure a crime was committed? I mean, that was a position of the LAPD.
Early on. Yeah, early on.
Early on, they said, we're not sure a crime was committed. Then you have the inordinate amount of time. By the way, also, kudos to you because you reported and you would not be backed down about the fingers. That was in the coroner's report, that the fingers were, what I think the term was, waterlogged.
Yeah, they did not. They said our report was wrong.
Yes, it said the report was wrong. They also said it was an investigative grand jury. Well, they stood up in court. They, meaning Beth, stood up in court and said, not one, not two, 3 grand juries has seen evidence in this case. So all of you people who kept saying investigative grand juries, sorry to tell you, that was not, I told you in real time that was nonsense. It's still nonsense. And it will continue to be nonsense, as you will see as this case unfolds. Number 3, the idea that they found and they announced not once, not twice, but 3 times in court, child porn. What was the purpose of the child porn? He's not charged with that. They announced wiretaps. They announced child porn. There was a singular purpose to that. Can you guess what that was?
Dirtying him up.
Of course, because they're trying to push back because the defense did not waive time. The defense said, we're ready. Get your ducks in order. And who, by the way, as we discussed last week, who was it that's trying to garner more time right now? It's not the defense.
It's
the prosecution.
Yeah, because, help me out here. If they would have gone to the grand jury and gotten an indictment, there would be no preliminary hearing. So given that they had 3 grand juries, why didn't they just go that route rather than doing what they did, to arrest him and then charge him?
So this part is pure speculation. I don't think let me break this up. It's not pure speculation. Nobody has definitively given an explanation for this because, as I told you last episode, the LAPD called the DA's bluff. I don't care what the DA says about them being in lockstep. That's nonsense.
Yeah, they quadrupled down on me on that and said you were wrong.
Correct. And they've only got one problem. If that was wrong, what was the explanation? Remember, you and I talked offline about what is the legal strategy for having the LAPD arrest somebody without a warrant or without a criminal complaint or an indictment.
I'm sorry for interrupting, but I asked that 3 times and they would not tell me.
Of course.
Go on.
Because there isn't, it's so ludicrous on its face that they just say it enough to think that people are going to just unflinchingly accept it. Oh, they're in lockstep. We always do this. They don't always do this. They don't arrest people on a Thursday after an 8-month investigation without a complaint and without an indictment. Unheard of. And it was LAPD pushing back and calling the DA's bluff in this case, which is also why they never asked for an indictment. And they had not 1, but 2, but 3 grand juries, which they could have done. And as everybody knows, the old saw, you can get a grand jury to indict anybody. They weren't ready. LAPD called their bluff. No amount of retro kind of rewriting of history is going to do that. And we will see what happens, because when is the preliminary hearing set for?
May 1st.
Yeah. You think that's happening?
Yes. I think the defense is going to demand it, and they have a right to it.
Right.
So, okay,
and what do you think the prosecution's going to do?
They're going to try to get a delay, but I think the judge is not going to give them a delay. I mean, they have a right to this, and I think the defense is going to stay with it. I really do. So you didn't answer my question. Why didn't they just get a grand jury indictment? They would have avoided all of this.
Because then that would have exposed them to what's called a Penal Code Section 995 motion to dismiss. On a 995 motion to dismiss, you are limited, if you're the prosecution, to the four corners of the indictment. Just like on a 995 from a preliminary hearing, you're limited to the record at the preliminary hearing. I am convinced, and I haven't seen anything to dissuade me, that they felt that based on what they'd put in front of a grand jury, that even though they would get an indictment, because grand juries very rarely reject that, although in the Central District federally, in the last 3 months, a lot of these ICE protests, the grand jury hasn't indicted. But in a case like this, they would have gotten an indictment, but then they would have been locked in to that record, and a judge would have been forced to make a decision as to whether there was enough evidence to have held this person.
So the evidence they show is that he sent or she sent him a threatening text to expose their relationship. She goes to his house, apparently that same day on April 23rd, 2025, and is never seen again. And the coroner's report shows that there appeared to be 2 stab wounds. Isn't that enough?
For probable cause?
Yeah.
It's enough to get you for probable cause that it's a homicide. It's not enough to get you to probable cause that he's the person connected to it.
So what do they have to show then at a prelim? Because doesn't the judge at the prelim have to do the same thing?
Correct. And that's why they don't want to do this by way of a prelim. That's why they didn't.
But they would have to do a prelim if they went the route they did, which was to charge him. So either way,
because they would have if they were in lockstep. You're right. If they were ready to do a prelim, they would have filed a criminal complaint, which requires a probable cause proceeding, and that would be a preliminary hearing normally, to get them to Superior Court bound over for trial. They weren't ready to file a criminal complaint. They did not want to trigger the 10 days for the preliminary hearing.
I don't think they thought the defense would do that.
They never thought ever. They thought coming on the heels, mind you, major crimes, same unit in the DA's office, just had not one but 2 lawyers in the Nick Reiner case, both ask for more time. So coming on the heels of that, you're kind of reflexive. If you're the DA, you're thinking, oh, the defense is going to come in. We're going to dump 40 terabytes of information on them. They're going to say, we can't be ready, Your Honor. We need more time. We'll waive time. Give us 2 more months. Then they would have backfilled their case at that point, hoping that maybe he would say something stupid while he's in the 77th Street station, or that he would have made a phone call and said something stupid that would have been used as an admission that would tie him to the complaint.
So it's going to go before a judge for a prelim. What impact is it going to have that the coroner, the medical examiner, equivocated by using the word may, that she may have died, or she may have had a sharp instrument penetrate her, and therefore it's a homicide? How big a problem is that at a preliminary hearing? I mean, is it possible that alone is going to make the judge say, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense, because they're definitively calling it a homicide when they're saying, we really don't know, but it may. Is this going to blow up at the prelim, or is the judge just going to say, go to trial and deal with it?
Well, you've heard me say this countless times, that the standard of probable cause at a prelim is the client breathing. But the problem from a defense standpoint, the hurdle is a judge will say, you know that it's a very low bar at the preliminary hearing. It's probable cause. And that is there a substantial evidence that points to that a crime was committed, and it points to this particular person? They've got 2 hurdles. Number one, substantial evidence that a crime was committed. I mean, that is a hurdle they have to get over, to your point. But then number 2, and that this person who is being accused is linked to it. And that's, I think, a real problem, that this person is linked to it. Even if you say may is enough for probable cause, not probable cause is less than clear and convincing. Okay. And so you've got that kind of low bar. However, you still have to link it, if you get to that point, to a particular accused. how are they going to do that? Just because she sent a threatening message? I don't think that's enough. And I would suspect that the DA did not think it was enough. Otherwise, and have somebody at the DA's office, when you call there, answer this question. Why didn't you indict back in December when they ruled this was maybe a homicide? Why didn't you indict back in November? Why did you wait? Or why did the LAPD all of a sudden, right ahead of the 1-year anniversary, decide to arrest? Why? What other explanation? Nobody's answered that question.
What about David's music? I mean, there has been a lot made, especially online, that David has written songs that seem to reference Celeste. I don't know if they really are, but there's some evidence that it sounds like Celeste. Will a judge allow that in evidence?
So
romantic homicide.
Yeah. So this is a raging controversy, believe it or not, in the criminal law, whether it was Young Thug, currently also in the Central District, Little Dirk. They're using lyrics and trying to use lyrics there as well. There are courts that have split on this as to whether you can do it. I would think for a preliminary hearing, even though I might disagree with it, and if I was the defense lawyer, I would be fighting it. I think most judges would allow that in as either under what's called 1101 or an adoptive admission or other kinds of creative prosecutorial theories, at least for purposes of a preliminary hearing. You're going to hear, if this ever goes.
No, I'm talking about trial. I'm not talking about the prelim. I'm talking about trial. Whether they're rolling the dice on reversible error.
Oh, they clearly are. I mean, that I'll give you. And I'm not so sure that there wouldn't be a pretrial hearing first before a judge says, I'm going to let that in.
Oh, 100%. I mean, there's no doubt there's going to be a hearing. Let's just say that there is evidence. I mean, he's not going to say anything, but there's evidence that it could be
he's
about
not going to
Celeste.
say anything, meaning he's not going to testify.
Right. I mean, he's not going to have any comment about the song, but they are going to try and surmise that it's about Celeste. It just feels like you're playing with fire, even if you get a conviction, because that's the kind of stuff where convictions get reversed.
Yeah, but let me tell you another kind of nettlesome problem with the criminal justice system. A lot of times, this happens where prosecutors at the trial level don't really care about protecting the record. They want the conviction, and they want the conviction to the point where they will commit error. You know, my father, who I often invoke, often said that the mark of a truly great trial lawyer is you know how to commit error and know it when you're doing it. And that applies both to prosecutors and the defense. And I've seen that time and time again, where a prosecutor will say, screw it, I'm going to roll the dice here and hope that an appellate court rules that the nature of the evidence was so overwhelming that it doesn't matter that they committed this error. I mean, there are countless cases, especially here in California, where on death penalty cases that the Supreme Court has ruled that something has been error. It's been clear error, but in the context of the conviction and the rest of the record, that it was harmless. I mean, that's the escape hatch.
I think there's a problem that the defense has, which is she was a 14-year-old girl. And there is going to be this feeling in the jury that I have seen over the years where they want to do justice for the family. And the only justice they can do is against David. So that if there's kind of a murky middle that they're in, tie goes to the prosecution.
So I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually did a Fox interview yesterday, and the anchor, whose name I forget, and she'll club me like a baby seal for it, but she mentioned the fact that when she had just heard the child porn, and the fact that it's a 13-year-old. And her response was, how do I get past that? That's just, and I said, let me tell you a story. I didn't tell her on air. I told her off air. I tried a case years ago in Riverside. And on the third retrial, it came out that they had found bestiality on my client's computer. And they asked the detective on the third retrial, they asked the detective, did you ask my client, Mr. Geragos' client, why he had bestiality in the computer? And the guy said, yes. He told me that he liked watching his first wife make it with the German Shepherd. And my heart sunk, my stomach, I got ill to my stomach. I asked to approach. I tried not to show that I was secretly worried about calling my malpractice carrier. And I said to the judge, I'm ineffective. I should have motion and eliminated this out. And this is awful, blah, blah, blah. Judge said, Mr. Geragos, you've got no excuse. You've tried this case 3 times. Goes to the jury. I actually told the jury in the closing, I don't know what happened. It's awful. You can't hold it against him. I lost sleep for 3 days. They came back and they acquitted the client. And I asked juror number 4, I said, how did you acquit? I haven't slept for 3 days. It was the biggest bonehead move I've ever made. She said, oh, Mr. Geragos, you don't know what happens down here in Riverside on a Saturday night. And so you never know.
Oh, my God. Are you serious?
Absolute God's honest truth. I still remember juror number 4.
You got to be kidding. What?
Yes. Absolute God's honest truth. I won't mention the client or the name, but that's the God's honest truth. It was dolphin porn or something like that on the computer. I've never even
okay. This is Geragos talking about Riverside, not me.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just telling you I tried the case in Riverside.
A juror said that?
The juror, they acquitted and said afterwards, she actually told me because I said I haven't slept in days.
Oh my
God. Worried about this.
Oh my God.
But it's for most people, when you hear child porn, it's over.
And they never said what this was. So I think to be continued, right? Okay.
But by the way, there was also one other fun fact in that hearing, which Beth kind of she may never speak to me again, but she slimed the defense with. She said there were wiretaps.
By the way, you're a defense lawyer. I think there's a long line there.
I just do my job. So she also mentioned wiretaps. What does that signal to you?
Yeah. I think what my gut was when I heard that is that they had suspicion enough to get a wiretap order, and they were trying to see who he was going to be, which buddy he was going to talk to, and maybe say something. That was what I thought.
So on the federal side, they usually never bring a case unless there's a snitch or a wiretap. State side, it's very rare for the state to have wiretaps. I can only think of less than 5 cases that I've had. And I've handled hundreds of murder cases.
Am I right about my theory?
Yes, exactly. That was also, by the way, your theory overlaps with my theory on why they took him to 77th Street Station. I think that they were trying or hoping that he would say something stupid or call somebody and say something stupid.
That's exactly it. Okay. I want to talk to you about something I don't think you know about. We got an email today, and this was an email that was sent to David's defense team. And from what I'm being told, this is one of many emails like this. And I want to read it to you. With the recent shocking news about the crimes David committed on a 12-year-old girl, it sickens me that your law firm would pick up this case and defend such a filthy human. I'm not surprised you are all Jews, all in caps, the only race that puts money above all morals and will go to the pits of hell for $1. I'm also not surprised your law firm also defended Prince Andrews and another Hollywood pedo. Pray someday you find your kids slaughtered in the trunk of a car. See how that feels. The world deserves less Jews and your monsters clients like David and Prince Andrews.
One of the unfortunate things of every high profile case I've ever been associated with or that I've commented on is there is always somebody who is unhinged, untethered, and just the dark underbellies. I remember 20 something years ago, I came home when I was defending both Scott Peterson and Michael Jackson, and somebody had placed uh, um, explosives at the bathroom, the little porta potty in front of the house. I remember being visited on a Friday by FBI saying they had credible threats on my life, and I said, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" And they said, "Nothing. We're just telling you." And and I remember, one of the most shocking ones. In fact, I've got it up on my wall in my office. Is when I was doing Colin Kaepernick's case almost 10 years ago, the blatant racist things that were said and directed at the law firm were just disgusting. I keep it up there just to remember just how unhinged a lot of people are. And I assume this was directed to Blair's office, and it's awful. And there's no place for it. And it's unfortunate that there are people out there whose brains have rotted to that point.
It's really just interesting to me that that people paint a lawyer with the same brush that they paint a defendant. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong to paint a defendant in a particular way, but they always paint the lawyer with the same brush. And, there are some pretty basic things there. But it just seems to get lost on people that, I'll tell you, just being a criminal defense lawyer, you think about it. And when you're representing people, by definition, you have done bad things, in some cases allegedly done horrendous things, and you're painted with the same brush. And especially in the climate today, I mean, this was not nearly the only one. I mean, they're getting a torrent of these. And
I'm telling you that I could tell story after story, but the association that people have with criminal defense lawyers and their clients. If your client is somebody, another example, I'll bring up Scott Peterson and Michael Jackson. When I was representing Scott, the website crashed, and you're talking 20-something years ago. So it's not exactly a robust social media era. A website crashed with people praying I would get cancer. And at the same time with Michael Jackson, the website crashed, but it was of people wishing me well, mostly out of the US. And I have seen that depending on who the client is. Yeah. I remember representing a Republican bundler in federal court, bundler meaning for donations, political donations. I got more hate mail from people for representing a Republican than I have where defending people accused of homicide. So it's really kind of but it's always been in the fabric of the US. And interestingly, if you just say, what about doctors? I mean, a doctor, when somebody comes into a trauma center and a doctor is there trying to do triage, he doesn't say, oh, by the way, are you an accused this or are you an accused that? He doesn't do the triages of the medical condition. It's not of who the person is.
Yeah, but a lawyer's job is to absolutely ask about that.
No, the lawyer's job is but there's a difference between a prosecutor who is supposed to do justice and a defense lawyer who is supposed to zealously advocate. Those are two distinct job differences in the job description. Well, that's why you have defense lawyers. That's why the system and the last bastion or was kind of firewall of democracy is the fact that you've got a jury and a jury to decide after adversarial fighting who is, whether they're going to convict a citizen or not.
Okay, last question. If there were a poll in the United States that should David be electrocuted, put in front of a firing squad, in some way killed right now? Forget about a trial based on what people have heard. What percentage of people do you suppose in the climate we're in would vote for that?
25%. I don't. It would.
That's a
it
big
would
number,
be too
Mark.
it would be too depressing to go above that.
I know,
There's
but even 25%, that is a quarter of the population.
I think there's a quarter of the population whose minds are closed on a lot of issues, and depends. And I think that switches. I don't think that that's uniform on all issues. I think that, look, whether you're left or right, I mean, there are people who are as closed-minded on the left as there are closed-minded people on the right, and people who just can't seem to get past whatever lens they're looking through. That's just human nature.
Wow. Yeah, I think you're right. Right. Okay, my friend. Have a good weekend. I will see you. See you next week.
Thanks, Harvey.